these are I'm actually thankful for the opportunity to tell the story, and I appreciate you listening. What I did when I came back was to get a job first because I didn't know. I mean, I was still trying to sort things through, and since I had my MBA, it would be logical. And I did some search. I ended up one of the things that was kind of interesting was that HEB, the bud company, it was about the time that Mr. Budd was backing off. Maybe I don't remember when he died, but his son was taking over everything. And so they were still in Corpus at that time. So I did interview with Charles in Corpus, and I had a lot of respect for the company. And he was clearly interested himself. He's an amazing guy. So I don't know whether I would have gotten the job, but I did, after thinking it through, decide that I wasn't convinced that, the grocery business was what I, even in a corporate mode, wanted. So I was always ambivalent about being a, quote, business person, for whatever reason, not any logic probably to it. But then I talked to a couple of faculty members that I had that were on at UT and really consulted with them, and they kind of helped guide me in that direction to begin with. And I was able to start, very fortunate, was able to start doing things that were relevant to the way the university was operating, and had some fortunate opportunities too. And that's where I really got involved with everything east of UT and all those issues. And so that led to me meeting with people, obviously, in establishing what turned out to be healthy relationships with some of the people that had, lived in the Black lands and were, resisting everything, and realized the history of African American families in this town, in Austin, and how they were treated, in so many negative ways. So I spent the bulk of my time in the Blacklands listening, and I think I was able to do that in a way that I'm not sure I would have had the impact without going through all of that I went through emotionally, I had my parents both did some of their college work later in their lives. So I had an opportunity to be on campus at a young age. I learned to swim in the women's swimming pool, which doesn't exist anymore, and participated in one of the courses as a young child for one of the courses that my mother was taking in the summer. So my parents were with the independent school district in Mason, Texas. My dad was superintendent, and my mother taught there in several different areas. So the university's been a part of me from the very beginning. So I never had, I kind of grew up with it, because a lot of times we would spend the summers in Austin, where either one of my parents working either on projects or things like that in graduate education for them. I have had the experience of being in the Army and had served a term in the Army that included uh, a, uh, a period of time in Vietnam and as an officer. And that was a major impact on me because the war was going on, and the I had really known that I'd probably be involved in the military because the draft board in the area, small or relatively large geographic area that I was part of, was having a very hard time filling their quota during the latter part of, especially during the latter part of the Vietnam War. And so that was all very much on my mind at that time. There were a lot of things going on in terms of protests and trying to keep up with things and different groups protesting. When we had to parade, quote parade, it was on the freshman field, which is what a lot of us from back in that age did, were done. And we would wear our uniforms and do some marching and do some standing at attention. And it became, and we were supposed to do this every Tuesday during lunch hour, noon to 1, and it became a site for protests. All sorts of people would come and protest, mainly related to the university in various ways. And here, most of us that were in the program and because of the war in Vietnam were, concerned about being seen and called. We were often called, various things that shouldn't be repeated. So, and because things were not going well, and everyone kind of everywhere wanted that war to be over with, there was a lot of dissidence in that regard. So it was strange to be a student, graduate student at that time, but also be perceived as the personification of all that's wrong with the military during a war. So at that particular time, I was working on my MBA, and I got into the MBA program because I was able to take ROTC and at least delay entry into the service. And so and that was something that I was very thankful for because all of my contemporaries and younger were really doing what they could to avoid ending up in Vietnam. And so I got into a program that the Army had decided to do to give people a chance to finish. Typically, it was graduate work and then serve and go through the ROTC program for 2 years, and then take a training to be an officer in different parts of the military. In this case, it was an Army, and the so that's what I had done. And so I had already served, had training, and was back, but had another year to complete. And of course, with the fervent hope, I would say quite truthfully, that the war would be over, So it was less the concern about serving in the military, but the circumstances that were in Vietnam, which were continually um, deteriorating. And everywhere you went, TVs were on, in dorms and fraternities and sororities, and tragic every night, the bombs and the people killed and the estimates and that sort of thing. So it was a very troubling period of time on campus for everyone. And there were a lot of different things going on, different groups trying to, be balanced, and others, were aggressively negative. Would anytime one of the deans or president or key individuals that had responsibility for UT would speak publicly, they would be attacked. A lot of times, unfortunately, literally kind of pushed, and so there were all sorts of things going on, and it was a very destabilized time, and no one really knew what to do. It's pretty clear. So, yeah, I really do. I mean, it's kind of my nature to do that. I have had done quite a few things in the very small uh, uh, school district that I grew up in. My father was the superintendent, but I really did. I was sensitive to those things. I had an older sister who was at UT, so that's another thing that brought us to Austin. And she was, so I've interacted with her also. Uh, but there were just periods of time where I really thought, where is all this going, and how does it end, or does it end, and that sort of thing. And then just another piece of when we would drill, we had to stand at attention for a period of time. And so it became inevitable that there would be probably, 20 people, 30 people that would come and walk in the aisles and get in close, in front of, everybody, and say to their face, how can you do this? Or you're worse than that, sort of thing. So the ambivalence there of on seeing kind of both sides, but knowing that I was I was in the Army, and I was destined at that time. I had not yet been to Vietnam, but then that did occur, and I was fervently hopeful that I wouldn't have to go, but did. And so that was a whole nother experience too. That was life changing. I was not in it, other than being, if you're just there, you were kind of in harm's way to a certain extent. But the war was being fought mainly by the United States bombing things north of the DMZ, and so the work that I had to do when I got to Vietnam was ultimately to be involved in the port of Da Nang, and that was all we did. We the port was under the responsibility of the Army. So I was actually assigned to be what they call the contracting officer with the group from Korea, that were uh, the ones doing the work, doing the work of getting things on and off the boat, the large ships that would come in and that sort of thing. And then we also had responsibility for security. So we had to be our total Army group was involved in patrolling during nighttime, and a part of military police would do it during the day. So all of that was just so absolutely foreign, and everyone knew the war was going to have to end. There was just no way it could go on, and there was no one thought, how is it going to end? And that was one of the big questions. But there was still fighting going on, still people, military people being damaged, injured, killed, and it was just it was so difficult because there was so much wrong that it was hard to find some kind of peace. So I did work at that to a degree internally more than anything else, and I did a lot of reading during that time too, because I had anticipated that I would like to be involved in higher education, public higher education specifically. Well, it had always been on my mind. It was not anything that just, I hadn't thought about. And I talked with people. I talked with various people that had done, faculty members that I'd had, others, and one would lead to another sometimes. And I got a lot of good advice, but I also feel that was very important to me to find a way to relieve some of the tension and the anxiety that did build up during those things that went on during that time. It was only later that I got into the school of education, and started work on my doctorate. What had happened to me is that I've had the opportunity, and there was a great deal of change going on at the university on several fronts, in society generally, but for other reasons, it was going on too. So I met with one faculty member that I had been very close to in the business school, who at that point in time was doing some work in the president's office. So I talked to him, and one thing led to another. I met a number of people that were in key positions in the governance of UT Austin, and listened carefully and found that there were people that sought my thoughts, and usually the result of that was usually that I would continue to have interaction with him. So it's hard to look at, and I have recently looked back at the things I did and thought about then, and am kind of amazed that I was oftentimes identified fairly young, and of course I've had the military experience that people knew about, but what I found was that those interactions were very useful. Not, and I've tried very hard to be fair because I was representing the from the view of the people in the Black Lands. The Black Lands, because of its soil, but it also was primarily African American. So the history of Austin and African Americans is all too believable in the times that we're going through in the South, and less so maybe the further you get away from the Deep South, but the whole thing was there. And so the area that even still now called the Black Lands, to a certain extent, was one of the areas that in Austin there were something on the order of a dozen or maybe more areas where blacks lived, and it wasn't they had they grew different reasons brought them together in certain areas, but they would tend to congregate there. And so the government, the government of the city decided that that they really were going for segregation. They wanted blacks, in certain areas only, and were doing different things, none of them, in my opinion, appropriate, to force that. And in some cases, literally forcing them to move. So at the same time, and this is a critical juxtaposition here now about the Blacklands area, is that the Board of Regents, and with justification, so Board of Regents for the whole university system, University of Texas system, and its 12 or 15 entities and medical schools and all sorts of things, were, and of course, governors were appointing members to the Board of Regents. Some governors had tendencies to do certain things. Other governors had tendencies to do certain things. And it's a great honor to be selected as a member of the Board of Regents. And so they, in the manifestation around this time, they were convinced that UT Austin was on the verge of becoming a truly nationally important or internationally important institution. With resources, the university has this amazing, even to this day, source of funding that they control, and the regents are controlled. So one of the most prestigious things that a governor could do was to get someone on the Board of Regents for UT. And in a similar manifestation for Texas A&M, because those were the two institutions that were clearly recognized as having strong, doing important things and finding the revenue and the support to do more of them. So there was this sense of expectation, and I still, to this day, when I walk on campus, when I see one of the placards that they put up about who were, of what the building was, what it was, and then who were the members of the Board of Regents at that time. And it's fascinating to this day. I still stop and think about. And as I got more involved, I've had to work with them. I had to work with the system office, the chancellor, and there was transition going on in those places too. And so what I saw, and For the couple, I'd say that maybe there were three people that I felt really comfortable with seeking advice and guidance and keeping, and not because everyone's would be walking kind of on thin ice because rumors would spread and that sort of thing too. So in the process, I started, and just for different reasons, would have an opportunity to talk with someone, or someone would seek me out, because the more I was in the Blacklands neighborhood and trying to work with the Neighborhood Alliance, what I was asked to do by two of the vice presidents was to go over and represent or be willing to talk with. And so I had a assistant to a, a position. I mean, I had a title that made some sense. I forget what that title was at the moment. And so, and there was a Blackland Neighborhood Association. So I started going over, and of course that's, say, over I-35 and listening. And that was what I decided to do. And I didn't really tell anybody that, but I was going to be trying to understand the issues, be fair about it, that sort of thing. And which was very painful, very painful. And what I made after about the first two times that I had a more or less formal involvement with the Blackland Neighborhood Association, I made a commitment to myself that I was not going to try to defend the university. I wasn't going to, say negative things about it, but I was not going to say, get involved or be evaluative. I was pretty clear about it. I'm here in the hierarchy, and these other people are here. And the thing that, and as we talked, and there was a lot of talk over a number of weeks and into months, where I think that I was able, and we were very fortunate to have two people that were really remarkable. They'd lived there a long time, remarkable. And they were the two that were the head of the association at the time. So I spent time with a larger group, but typically more with them. And they both, and the thing I told them, I said, I'm not going to play any games. And that means that I will be reporting, honestly back to the university too, of what's said and what the issues are. And I will do that to the best of my ability. And of course, they were new, and I said I'll work with getting, issues. Particular issues would come up, literally over a small home that the university wanted to buy, and that sort of thing would come up. And so I really felt that I had the only way I was going to have any impact, and my feelings were very strong about the whole way that the African American community from the beginning really was treated in Austin, and those were issues that were important to me too. And part of that goes back to just the dad, as superintendent of schools in Mason. There was a black school that had maybe 3 families and a dozen or so students and 1 teacher. And so he and the chairman of the board of trustees, or the school board, when it came down that integration was to occur, my dad led a couple of school board members talked to the parents of the family, and said that, and offered, they said that we will, uh, your children can come to this, to the school, to the Mason School, elementary, junior high, high school, and be full, members. But we would not be able to keep uh, the your teacher. Your teacher would not transfer over where the students were. And so the irony is, and I think this is another thing I really appreciate about my dad, it was soft spoken and not one to take drastic actions at all. But he wanted me to come with him, and not to be, just to sense it. So I sat in the car. I wasn't in the, I didn't go in. But so they went in, talked to, I guess maybe there were three of them, talked to the families and said, we're here to offer this. We can do it now. It's legal. We want you to come, but your teacher would not. And then they said, we'll leave, and so they came out and waited. And then the kind of spokesperson of, which was one of the men, came out and said that they had made a decision. So they went back in and they said that we will start going to the school. And both the board members and my dad were saying, well, we will certainly work to help the teacher find another job somewhere, but not in Mason. Those sort of things it just seemed like, to me, it seemed like it was necessary to do these things. I mean, go to work through them, but so challenging to do. And so my father was a very soft-spoken man. He was a large person, but very soft-spoken. So he was the kind of person you met and say, this is a good guy. He's probably a real guy, and he was, and that sort of thing. So I learned a lot from my father. I do, and I think so. The thing I just knew I had to do was be consistent. I couldn't, and I worried and prayed about that sort of thing, of being, and I got, so there were ultimately probably 4 people that were part of the Blackland neighborhood that I had enough interactions with over a long enough period of time that I think that they truly thought, if we can believe any of them, he's our best hope. And that's what I wouldn't say, but my actions were to be that as best I could. And then that's the same way back with the various people within this was important to UT Austin. It was important to the Board of Regents. It was important to the leadership at the system, and the system is there, all the ranking and people there that are in play. Some of whom, and they are changing sometimes. They do change. They change inevitably, and so I had a chance in that setting to be in several different meetings because I had, probably they realized that over the months that this went on, that they had gotten various signals back that they were willing to talk to me, because they could have at any point said, get Sharpe out of here, or get anybody that did it on other things too. And there were people there were Anglo people, one of whom wrote his dissertation on this issue. That is in the library. And I had ultimately a lot of respect for him because he could be tough. He'd get just real close to, is he going to come across the table? And yet would then kind of back off too. And what I tried to never do was to be, getting in there, because I thought I was on, I didn't, and I would talk to them about not who was doing what, but the Board of Regents, for example. So, and this is an important thing, and this was important, and I kept it in my mind all the time, that the board at that time was convinced that UT Austin was on the verge of being a world-class university, but it was short of that. And the only way, or one of the only ways it could move that way, was to be able to grow. And so they made a decision that they were going to, their goal was to buy all of this land. And that stayed kind of consistent. You just weren't sure what the right things were to do. And some of them that seemed right weren't, and had led to problems, and some of them that they did. And then there were other people in the community in Austin that cared about this without question. And so there were any number of different groups that got together, some of them from the system in their various roles, some of them from UT Austin. And typically, if it was about the aspects of the Blacklands, I would often be, expected to be there. Not that I said much, but I got the sense of the politics of, you watch people and you try to figure them out, and you anticipate what they might say. And sometimes they, crush you because you think you've gotten how it was. So, but the one thing that I did was that I was prepared to, if I was told to do something that I did not feel was in the best interest of the university, not me at all, would be to say, no, I don't. If I'm talking with a group back on campus, which was often with just campus people, and leaders, or with system. So I would be called into some meetings that would have some of those groups together. So I got an amazing opportunity to see those things at work. I knew, in passing, some of the members of the board of regents, and that's where the authority was, and the chancellor would acknowledge that. And there was a chancellor that had been around for a good long while. And so the other thing is that there was one major player that everyone listened to, but did not always, agree with, was Frank Irwin. So the Irwin Center was in the process of being built at that time, and or what was ultimately called the Irwin Center, and that sort of thing. And he was uh, pretty notorious for being a heavy drinker. He liked people. He courted students and athletes and things like that in ways that were it showed his interest, I guess, to a certain extent. But he was a complex person too, without that. So when all of this sort of thing came together, I really realized that the thing that I wanted to see was uh, going to be a combination of give and take. And my fear was that the university would be too stubborn to give a little. Ultimately, I think they did, and some people helped on that. And I wish I knew, some of the things that happened that led to ultimately a more successful uh, result uh, over a long period of time too. So I don't know, but as I say, what kept me going was that I'm not going to. I've got to be fair, and I've got to. And if I say I can't, I'm sorry. I don't agree personally, but there's not anything I can do about it, or there's not anything I'm willing to do about it, and that sort of thing too. I learned a great deal, and some of the things that I learned were when I can remember one meeting particularly where there was a person at the system that was had been around a long time and in a kind of vice role of one of the positions. It's hard to keep up the roles changing names and things. And the, and I remember the rooms because the people, for a while, the system uh, was in the tower, and the university leadership was in the tower, and those were, and the thing that people always, it was known enough that when some problem arose, the east side of the campus out would come the system people, and the west side would come the leadership, president and all, and they glare at each other. Who's going to make the first move? That's probably more hypothetical than anything. But then eventually, and by the time we're talking now, the system was downtown. And that was a very important thing to get off the campus. I saw enough of it. I was there long enough to see enough of it to realize that it was just kind of untenable because so many people that were in positions of very important significance were bound and determined to get their way, And so the feeling I have, or the thing that I did, and so sometimes there would be system people and UT people, and the the issue would come up. And so in this one meeting, one of the older, and he'd been around a long time, and I'd heard his reputation. I didn't know him much. I hadn't seen him. But there were maybe a dozen of us in a room, fairly small room, and he went berserk. He just, and he felt that, and a lot of it was around the fact that we've, didn't get the howitzers out and go over and, just clean it off and take over, was basically where he was from. And he just railed and railed and railed. And interestingly enough, that finally ended. He quit railing, and the meeting ended. And he didn't get his way, or we didn't get anything accomplished, in fact, other than everybody's blood pressure had gone up a whole lot. And I thought this is the personification of what's wrong, when people get into positions like that. And in his defense, it was probably, he knew he was kind of on his last gasp. And I've thought about him a lot too, because he was very smart and all sorts of things too. So the other thing that, and there could be stories about this, but the fact that I was in, and of course we had meetings of the president's staff, and so while this was going on, there were changes too. We had some changes in positions and things like that, and in that process, I worked more with the president's office directly, and had responsibilities for some other issues that came up. The HRC had problems. And others, and so I ended up a lot of times being the one to kind of go do something around the issue. And one of them was that just a little later, the Edwin Center was getting ready to open, and they knew, and they'd gone around and seen all these, big universities with places like this that see a lot of people, and they've got to have events, and they've got to have, entertainers and all that sort of thing come and pay, and including the, things for kids and all of that sort of thing, too. And so, but the big deal was that you had to bring the big time rock groups in, that you just got to do it. Okay. So the Dean Justice, who and his wife came, and her husband was really a pro about this, and a good guy too. And he was vice president for business affairs at the time. And when Sharon came, she got involved with the Dean of Students office, and then ultimately was the Dean of Students. So Dean and I were sharing an office in the business. There weren't a lot of offices, so we had a petition between us, but it was a big office, so they just made it. He was on one side and I was on the other side, and of course we talked a lot, and he was learning. I was learning from him too, but he was learning about all the ins and outs as much as we could. So was Sharon even. There is an announcement of a group that was going to come to the Urban Center, one of the first ones. And its name was 9-inch nails. 9-inch nails. And one of the things that Edwin did, Edwin kept the whole UT system kind of under his thumb forever almost, and did it very aggressively, frankly. And so in any event, the Catholic bishop is visited, as it turns out, by some of his parishioners who were complaining about this sacrilege, the 9-inch nails. They were saying this is not, compatible with the University of Texas and that sort of thing. And so the bishop wrote Charles Franklin, the vice president for business affairs, who was one of my bosses at that time. And he was a very soft spoken guy. He really was. And he was a straight shooter, and he tried to play by all these rules that were put on him by all these different people, individual regents and other things, and was just fascinating to see him. There were times I just felt the pain that he was going through. So in any event, he asked me if I would go. The bishop wanted to know more about this. So Charles asked me to go and represent the university with the bishop. And I felt, not a Catholic, but a good Episcopalian, I felt, oh dear. And he had a wonderful reputation, the bishop did. So I said, well, yes, I'll go, and with the financial, we've got to, make our money. And yes, it's embarrassing. And so some of it's going to be, and it will be. And this is the first part of it and all. But that, for some reason, I thought, oh, goodness. So I went, and I had seen him in action. He was a wonderful person, dearly loved. So I went, and once again was saying, I'm just going to explain it, kind of financially, and that we had heard as we were trying to find the university, as it was trying to find a person to come, that said it was a very difficult position to be in for a public, particularly a public university, from that standpoint too. So, but it just, I thought, well, my goodness, why me? But I did go, and we did have. He was really a wonderful person, and but I was expecting him to. Well, I mean, I was surprised that I was asked to go, but those are the things Charles didn't want to do. He was in a position to not have to do them too in certain areas. And so we talked a while and got to that issue. And of course, he knew Edwin, everybody knew Edwin. And I said, well, this is, it's just kind of like, this is the cost of doing business and staying financially viable. And he didn't say anything that he didn't say, I reject that or anything like that. He probably saw how miserable I was or whatever. And I remember that just so vividly. And that's the thing that Charles would have done too, but he really didn't. It was just, and he was a fairly shy person. He was smart as he could be, pretty shy, and he wanted to please. He had another way that Edwin controlled the university in its entirety was because he always knew more than anybody else, and he had run it all for so long. And there were things like that, and that went on and on. And certainly there were things that shouldn't have happened. No telling what and where. And I even think of the medical schools, because boy, that's when you're playing hardball with people that need to get into the cancer ward or something like that, And then usually the people that were in charge of that were as aggressive or able or smart or whatever. So there were always, it seemed like, challenges that you'd hear about, sometimes in the news, but sometimes just kind of in those sort of things. But the whole mix was intriguing, the whole thing was. And I felt like if just take one, kind of false move that could just evaporate. I could evaporate, be evaporated.